NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
So our topic today is supporting persons with disabilities, community services and resources for persons with disabilities with a specific focus on Arlington County. I'm going to thank Morgan for joining me today. As Bonnie said, I'm the director of the Ally Advocacy Center at the Ark of Loudoun. And I think what I want to say first is that in looking at community services and resources, I have a strong belief in helping people make connections, and that's why we have circles on the first page of this. The thing that I think that is probably the most prominent thing to me is that you don't know what you don't know. So I think that families start at this point. I think that individuals with disabilities and I think professionals in the community kind of experience the same thing, that an individual with disabilities may enter the system at any point. It might be a child who's a 4-year-old and the parents are either given information about that disability, maybe not given information. And I think that we kind of think that there should be some kind of a guide somewhere, and there isn't. So people kind of enter the system and access resources at different points in time. It's not unusual for us to meet students as they're about to graduate from high school who's kind of fallen through the cracks and didn't know that they could be in contact with the Community Services Board, or that there would be resources available to them. So our goal in this presentation is that you gain an understanding about connecting persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities to community resources, that you identify resources and services that might be available to them, and that you learn about resources specific to Arlington County. Most importantly, that not that you necessarily know what the resources are, but just that you know that there are some unique opportunities that exist for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. They're different across all states. So there are some unique things that Arlington County is able to offer that Morgan is going to highlight for you. So really what I want you to know is that there are questions that you should ask, and Nancy talked about this before, to help kind of guide you to figure out whether or not somebody has a disability, especially if the individual is not volunteering that information to you, but really that you understand, and hopefully in this presentation with Arlington County, that you're able to make a good connection with somebody that can help you locate those resources, so that you don't need to know exactly what the resources are, but that there are people to go to who can help walk you through the process. And I would also say that just like when Lucy and Melissa talked last week, that you meet one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. When you're looking at putting together a personalized justice plan for an individual, it's a unique plan. So there isn't any cookie cutter approach. There are a wealth of resources out there, but it really is working with that individual and their support group to figure out what resources are best for that individual. So some questions that you might ask somebody that you've encountered, and I won't spend a lot of time on this because I think Nancy and our presentation overlaps a little bit, but you might ask somebody if they have a support person that they would like to get for you to help them. So one of our goals in this presentation too is that you have a better sense of what questions you might ask that might answer the question of what somebody's disability is, or the degree to which their disability exists. So where do you live and who do you live with? If you work, tell me a little bit about your job and what you do at work. If you have a support person, a job coach, a case manager, a social worker, a support coordinator, or a helper, those might be terms that individual is familiar with. Do you receive Social Security benefits, or have you ever applied for SSI or SSDI? And did you ever have any extra help when you were in school? Does someone help you manage your money? Resources related to housing and other benefits. So two things that are important in this that are unique to some unique to individuals with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. It's really important, especially before engaging with the community services board in the county where the person lives. When an individual turns 18, that's the best time for an individual to apply for SSI. And one of the reasons for that, so that supplemental security income, when an individual is 18, even though in the state of Virginia, they're entitled to remain in the school system if they have an IEP until the age of 21 or 22. Applying for SSI at that point in time is when they're truly an adult and they're able to make their own decisions and be independent. Applying for SSI at that point is important because it provides them with some income, for one. It provides them with some verifiable income, which is helpful in looking at benefits that they might be entitled to, and as their own person, not as a minor or a dependent on their parents. And then the other thing that's I think is really important about this is that with disabilities, and Morgan will talk about this a little bit later, there's a distinction with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities with the ages of 18 and 22, which are important, but establishing that disability with Social Security prior to the age of 22 is important because the individual then becomes reviewed by Social Security as an adult child with a disability. And there's a kind of a causal relationship or a connection that's made within Social Security with that individual and their parents' work history. So an individual might be entitled to greater benefits when their parent either retires or if the parent passes away. And in this area in Northern Virginia, that distinction and that amount of money can be pretty significant for an individual with disability. Another definition that I think is important to know, and it's one of the attachments that you got earlier today, and that is a page that talks about the Department of Justice settlement population and what the distinction with that is. And so when Morgan talks a little bit later about housing, there are a group of individuals who are considered part of this population. A number of years ago, the Department of Justice did an investigation of the state of Virginia, and Virginia is still trying to comply with some of those things. And the handout that you have as an attachment gives you a lot of information about the changes that Virginia needed to make. And so there are some housing opportunities. I am most familiar with Loudoun County. It applies to Loudoun County. It also applies to Arlington in terms of housing. But under that settlement agreement, and that includes individuals who are currently receiving a developmental disability waiver, they could be on the developmental disability waiver wait list, or they could currently reside in a nursing home or an intermediate care facility. And so that's just an important thing to know because it does, there are a lot of programs that are available to individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities, but the criteria could be different for each one of them. And there are some preferences in terms of housing that are given to individuals that are part of that settlement population. Within the Commonwealth of Virginia, the point of access to services for an individual with developmental disabilities is going to be through the Community Services Board and the long-term care Medicaid waivers that we'll talk about more in depth in this presentation. Your port of entry is that Community Services Board. So in Arlington County, it's the Aging and Disability Services Division that manages the following three programs. So the one that we're going to focus on today is intellectual and developmental disabilities. There's also a program for older adults and related to mental health, and then for seniors. So eligibility for services the individual has to be 3 years of age or older. They have to have a documented developmental disability diagnosis. And then in Arlington County, they submit a specific application for services. And that was also sent out to the group earlier today. So in trying to look at eligibility, documents that would be helpful to have or that you'll be asked to submit are a psychological or a neuropsych evaluation, medical records, an IEP, which is an individualized education plan if an individual was a student and had an educational plan within the school system. Any kind of adaptive functioning assessments and previous assessments are really helpful to be able to provide to the Community Services Board. And I'm going to let Morgan begin talking from here. As I said before, and I know this was covered last week by Lucy and Melissa, but just breaking down a little bit the distinction between the requirements for defining a developmental disability and intellectual disability are important. And one of the reasons for that is that in looking at who is a candidate for services can depend on that diagnosis. There are also services that you might be entitled to through the Community Services Board, but you may not qualify for one of the long-term care Medicaid waivers. And that is just because of the definition of a developmental disability. So Morgan, I'll let you take it from here for right now.
Thank you, Eileen. So thanks for having me here. Yes, I'll go over the definition. So there's two definitions I wanted to review, the developmental disability definition, and then there's a separate definition for intellectual disability only. So developmental disability refers to an individual that has an attributable mental or physical impairment than a sole diagnosis of mental illness. The main part is that the age of onset is documented to be prior to the age of 22. It's also has to be likely to continue indefinitely. Are you going to move the slides? I mean, okay, here we go. There's also a functional limitation requirement. So to meet that definition, it's the disability itself, as well as meeting the substantial functional limitation in 3 or more of the following major life activity areas. So when Eileen was talking about the adaptive functioning assessments, such as a Vineland, that's what's helpful to kind of get at whether there are substantial functional limitations, as well as a IEP can kind of get at that as well. So more assessments we have, more information we can pull from to better determine if an individual meets the definition or not. And then finally, the individual also has to have a need of a combination of services that is expected to require assistance for lifelong and require a plan to address those needs. When looking at intellectual disability, it is a little different than developmental disability. The age of onset has to be prior to the age of 18. And then also there's still a functional limitation component of it, but it's meeting 2 of the significant functional limitations in conceptual, social, and practical adaptive skills. So the services that Arlington County Developmental Disability Services provides is we provide support coordination, otherwise known as case management. The goal of support coordination is to assist families with accessing the appropriate services based on their needs and preferences. We provide support coordination, both adults and children, with the main overall goal is to promote independence for Arlington County residents with developmental disabilities. So again, by helping them and their families access services, which help them to enable choice and to choose how they want to live in the community. There's a lot of services out there, and there's a lot of gateways of trying to get into it, and it becomes difficult to kind of navigate the system. We don't expect people to be experts, families, individuals. We don't expect them to be experts, and that's why we're really there to help to kind of guide and navigate to promote that independence. The requirements for support coordination are not the same as the DD waiver. We also offer locally funded services. The 3 main locally funded services we offer are employment supports. These include group and individual supported employment programs, as well as group day support programs. These programs help enable adults with developmental disabilities to prepare for and engage in meaningful employment and increase their functional skills and self-sufficiency. We also provide transportation services to get to the group day support, as well as some employment programs. We will pay for locally fund those transportation options, since transportation can be a barrier to engaging in services. So the locally funded services are available for those who are not on the DD waiver. They can be on the DD waiver wait list, or they could just not have been eligible for the DD waiver. So all those, every individual who fits into that category would be eligible for the locally funded services. When we're looking at the DD Medicaid waiver wait list, the eligibility process is that they have to meet the definition of the Code of Virginia, and that's what we're doing during eligibility for support coordination services, is we're determining if the individual, based on documentation, meets the Code of Virginia definition. And then the second part is a VIDES assessment is completed. VIDES stands for Virginia Individual Developmental Disability Eligibility Survey. There's two different VIDES, one for children, which is 17 and under, and then one for adults, which is 18 and over. For children, there's 7 to 8 categories, and they have to meet on 2 of those categories. For adults, there are 8 categories, and they have to meet on 3 of those 8 categories. And that meets the criteria for eligibility for intermediate care facility, the ICF, as Eileen was talking about earlier. The VIDES assessment is not a one and done kind of deal. If someone doesn't meet on VIDES assessment at that point, they can always be reassessed later on at any time when the individual, family, or supported decision maker seems that there's a change in functioning or change in abilities. A VIDES can be completed at any point. We have had a lot of individuals who have not met, and then later on, things have happened where they do then meet on the VIDES assessment. When going on the DD waiver, if someone is eligible for the DD waiver and they're placed on the waiver wait list, a DD waiver slot is assigned based on need, not based on when they were put on the waiting list. So we can have someone on the waiting list for years and just not have a high need, and then have someone who comes on almost immediately and have a very high need who might get a waiver ahead. So one of the important things to know is that the DD waiver is not just it's not first come, first serve kind of thing. And it's not you've been on the wait list for 30 plus years, so you're going to get a DD waiver. We assess need through a priority needs checklist. And based on that checklist, they're assigned a priority 1, 2, or 3. Individuals on priority 1 will always be reviewed for a waiver when waivers are allocated or there's a turnover slot for a waiver. So the DD Medicaid waiver is the overall waiver kind of umbrella. And then under the DD Medicaid waiver, there are 3 different types of waivers that offer different types of supports. There's the building independence, family individual supports, and the community living waiver. The building independence waiver is only available to individuals 18 and over and are living outside of their family home. The family individual supports and community living waiver doesn't have that stipulation. The community living waiver is the only waiver, though, that will cover residential group home services or supported living type of services. So commonly used services with the DD waiver, and there are many more than what I'm going to discuss here, but these are the ones that we typically will see with waiver services is personal care assistance. That's really a support that comes in to help an individual with completing AD activities of daily living, personal hygiene, toileting, transferring, lifting, those type of everyday skills. Therapeutic consultation, that could include physical therapy, occupational therapy, but more typically we see is behavioral consultation, which the behavior consultant will develop a behavior plan and help train staff and support workers or family members to implement and use that behavior plan. There's in-home residential supports, which is more of a skill building activity to assist someone with, support someone with becoming more independent with activities in the home or in the community. Supported employment, center-based day support, residential group home, again, that's only with the CL waiver. supervised living and supported living. Arlington County also has a service called Self-Directed Services Funding. This is actually some really neat funding that can be used for any individual who is currently not receiving local funding, as well as not on the DD waiver. So this is a service that the individual, as well as someone who wants to help support them or advocate for them, really find services to help engage them in the community. And so Arlington County, through these funds, will help pave to provide that support. The support coordinator would not be responsible for really managing that or finding the services. It's really, again, a self-directed service. So the individual would be the ones expected to go out and find someone or find a employment service or volunteer activity that helps to keep them engaged within the community. The support coordinator would be checking in to make sure the service is being implemented appropriately, but it's really self-directed, really. It's a great opportunity for individuals who don't have a waiver, since this could be a difficult situation after they graduate from school of what to do next. To be eligible for self-directed services, the individual has to be an Arlington resident. They have to be a recent graduate, completing school within 12 to 24 months of the request date for this funding, and no longer eligible for IDEA services. They have to be age 22 years or older, eligible for developmental disability services. So again, they have to be go through the eligibility process, which starts off with that application and all those assessments. Not actively assigned to a DD Medicaid waiver, and not actively receiving any locally funded services or supports. We do have housing opportunities as well within Arlington County. So we have the permanent supportive housing, which is the classic Section 8 housing, and we work closely with DBHDS on identifying the priority population to get into housing. Recently, we actually had a new building opened up that had a bunch of permanent supportive housing units that opened up, and we moved in a lot of individuals into those units. And one individual that I'm supporting, that individual is incredibly happy, and behaviors have gone down, independence level has gone up, and it's been just wonderful to see that growth. So there's that opportunity. We also within Arlington County have a housing grant. The housing grant, while not as robust as the permanent supportive housing, does provide low-income housing subsidy to individuals who qualify under the income limits. Another service that we provide within Arlington County is we have a therapist, a licensed clinical social worker who provides therapy specifically to our DD population. So individuals, again, who are in services with us have access to that therapy service, as well as a psychiatrist, again, who works specifically with the DD population in providing medication management. The therapist who's in the position now is a former support coordinator and many years of working with individuals with developmental disability. What we have found is that when a therapist knows how to work with the population, individuals tend to open up more and tend to be more involved and tend to be more get better results from the therapy. So that's a great benefit to have as a source within Arlington. It is billed through Medicaid or on a sliding scale if an individual doesn't have Medicaid. It's not a high cost service. One question that might be helpful to also be asking is what county do you live in? In Arlington County, at least, we do have emergency services that's on call 24/7. For support coordination, we always have a duty worker on between the 8 to 5 hours that can answer any questions or access any medical or records to help kind of guide a conversation or answer any questions that someone might have about. about an individual. But after hours, we do have emergency services that are also able to access the medical record and kind of see what services someone is receiving. And these are just some main contacts. You see my name up top. Again, I'm an Administrative Services Program Manager. I handle all intakes, applications, eligibility. So the point of contact really, or any questions, please feel free to give me a call. You can email me. If you just want to talk about, what opportunities are out there, I'm more than happy to have that type of conversation. Below my name, there's LaVoyce Reed, who is our bureau chief, who is my supervisor, and she's over the Developmental Disability Services. Again, any general questions about services. And then I also included Elizabeth Cannon. She's our Supported Employment and Group Day Support Services Contract Manager. So with a lot of those locally funded services, they kind of go through Elizabeth for the funding source. She is a great person to have any questions about the Supported Employment Services.
I just want to add to, in the handouts that you were sent earlier today, there is one really good guide that the ARC of Northern Virginia put out that has information from DBHDS on it. And I feel like it is the best summary of, you're looking at the developmental disability waivers, but also when you're looking at long-term care Medicaid waivers across the state of Virginia, it's color coded with arrows. So it's a really simple, self-explanatory guide. But the CCC Plus waiver is another resource for someone, and it can be for anyone. It could be for a 4-year-old to a 95-year-old. The screening for that is called the Uniform Assessment Instrument, and it really is a screening for nursing home placement. So it really is looking at individuals that have medical needs. And then on the other side of that, the other colored arrow are the developmental disability waivers and the process that you get to that. The other great part about that handout is that it lists all of those developmental disability waivers that you're essentially just getting on a wait list for. And to put it in perspective, the state of Virginia, there are about 12,000 people waiting for those waivers. But looking at that guide will give you a really clear understanding of, if you have a client, what services they might be entitled to, and then understand their process, like how to advocate and use those resources. So I would say for Arlington County, one of your best resources is Lucy Bittnell with the ARC of Northern Virginia. And you're welcome to call the ARC of Loudoun as well, but we field phone calls related to resources related to any kind of a disability. And the goal really would be that you have a name to associate with, you have some sense of there are resources out there. How do I get them? How do I identify them? Or how do I connect somebody with that? So I feel like there are a lot of connections that you can make. It's really just a matter of kind of understanding the questions to ask and then knowing who to go to, because every county operates a little bit differently and has different resources to offer. And Randy, thank you for putting that in the chat.
So let me ask you, Eileen, I think one of the things that we look at, one of the things you've talked about is connection to services. I think one of the other concerns that often comes up in this space is things that may put somebody at risk to lose services that they have. Are there some things that maybe we should be thinking about, asking about, to make sure that as we're thinking about how cases are going to get handled, what if they put somebody at risk for losing a benefit that they may have? Not to put you on the spot with this, but I'm going to.
Well, being incarcerated would definitely put you at risk for losing a lot of services. You would lose your Social Security benefits if you have them. You would lose your waiver services if you have them. You might still have some contact with your support coordinator at that point in time if you have one. And that's where I feel like our groups, the Loudoun Disability and Justice Coalition and the Arlington group, are really important, that individuals have a point of contact in those counties to go to really try to get you connected with resources to divert a situation before it comes to that, if possible, or to make sure that basically to make sure that individuals' disabilities are taken into consideration in the process of that criminal justice process, and that that you're connected with advocates, with the best advocates, because there really are lifelong repercussions. There are, being on the sex offenders registry, there are lots of consequences, and thankfully right now there is a lot of legislation that's been passed that relates to individuals with disabilities and ensuring their disabilities taken into consideration in that process.
Maybe in that space, again, I feel bad that I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm also confident that you know how to say, no, I don't know that if you don't know that.
Okay.
You mentioned a little bit, and some of the other folks may be able to chime in as well, the risk of discontinuance of services and how easy it is to restart those services once they're discontinued. So somebody who may be incarcerated for a period of time and may lose their Social Security, their SSDI or their SSI benefits, and what it may look like to then have to try to restart those benefits after they're incarcerated.
So, and I'll let anybody else who wants to chime in to answer this question, you're welcome to. Melissa, if you have any thoughts about this too, you're welcome, or Lucy. I think that in terms of restarting benefits, like it's quite a process. So if you have an individual who's someone who hasn't had any issues, they have a disability, they're 18, they're applying for Social Security, it can easily take 6 to 9 months, maybe to a year, to just get benefits established. And so if you're housing, for example, you need to have some kind of sustainable, documentable, verifiable income. And if you don't have that Social Security and you're not employed, you're really lacking. You don't have anything to be able to put forth to show that you can actually afford to live someplace. In the case where an individual might have had a prior work history too, it gets even a little more complicated because Social Security doesn't really care that you have a disability. They care that you're not able to earn substantial gainful employment. So that in and of itself, they're looking at not that you can earn a living that would enable you to live independently in this area, but just that you were able to earn up to a certain amount of money. Restarting services for waiver services, Morgan, you might be able to answer better, but I would assume that an individual, they could restart those benefits, but it's a matter of reapplying and getting one of those developmental disability waivers is really quite a process that individuals can potentially wait for years to get those waivers. And if it is a community living waiver that provides 24-hour supports for an individual's, less and less of those waivers are being allocated within the state. And they really are kind of this golden ticket that people hold on to. So I feel like any attempts that we can make to educate individuals with disabilities, their families, and professionals across the community to try to change the outcomes that all of these intercepts across the system so that people are better aware of the risks and the potential losses are really to their advantage.
Okay, Luce, I was just going to jump in really fast. I think this gets back to that point where you want to include the person's team. When somebody is arrested or starts to interface with the court system, it's really important to find out who that community service board support coordinator is. Because I think Morgan could speak to this too, is that if you give them the information ahead of time, we can work to make sure that services aren't lost or that we can, build in some waivers. A person who even has supportive housing, if they're in a situation, you can get a variance so they don't lose their housing. So again, it's that communication with the team that's so important.
Yeah, and
I just wanted to clarify, sorry, real quickly, Morgan, because we get asked this a lot, like, it needs to be really clearly understood that if someone has a criminal conviction, that doesn't bar them ever from getting a Medicaid waiver. With that being said, a Medicaid waiver is really a funding stream. So you take that waiver and you use that waiver to pay for residential services or for other things. So while a conviction doesn't prevent someone from obtaining the funding, it may prevent them from effectively using it. So for example, if you're going to use that funding to go out and get a job, that employer can still run a background check. If you're going to use that funding to go out and live in your own apartment, the apartment can still run a criminal history check. So those kinds of things. So I think it's just so important to understand that, yes, some resources are still available and on the table regardless of conviction, but they're tied to all kinds of other pieces that relate to conviction. So it's a complicated web to help people navigate.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. I know that's absolutely correct. So being incarcerated has no effect on whether you're eligible for the waiver or not. Now, if you have the waiver and then you were incarcerated and lost it, and then you do have to go back through the process of getting the waiver, you just don't get a waiver back. But yeah, it's the funding source stream, and depending on the offense. So, for example, looking at group home services, a lot of group homes have reasons of why they wouldn't admit someone into services. For example, I know a lot of group homes, someone who's a known fire setter, that's one of the reasons why they might not admit someone into the group home. So the pool of providers gets smaller depending on the offense, but the waiver itself has no, the incarceration has no bearing on whether you get a waiver or not, or whether you're eligible for it or not.
Thank you for that, Morgan. I think my question kind of lends more to what Nancy was talking about with regard to collaboration and communication. Oftentimes, release of information kind of prohibit probation officers from getting information. And I guess because I don't speak for probation, but I happen to be a probation supervisor. That's a key piece of it for us, whether we're being proactive or reactive, because probation, we kind of balance it. We can kind of give some advocacy for people to kind of have options and opportunities to remain in the community because of, developmental disabilities, or we don't want to interrupt services. And sometimes there's some advocacy because public safety is at jeopardy. But I think the communication piece about consent for release of information, sharing information, knowing these things, is important. Does anyone want to speak to that? Is there a specific consent? And I'm speaking for Arlington or saying Arlington, but I would imagine it's every other jurisdiction about getting those consents signed, having the conversation. So we're always working to make sure that we're not disadvantaging individuals with developmental disabilities that are justice involved. I know that was kind of wordy, but does it make sense a little bit?
It makes total sense, because what you're talking about is that intercept, right? Where do we cross over? How do we have a common conversation? So I don't know, in Arlington, how would that work? Say somebody was put into jail or was incarcerated, who would they contact to get that release process going?
So they can contact the support coordinator or contact ADSD in general, and we can send out a release of information signed. I can send them out to agencies ahead of time, and if you wanted to tap them on file and get them signed as they come in, so it doesn't disrupt, and there's a limited barrier there, I'm more than happy to do that. With Arlington Public Schools, we need a release of information with them, and I send there's social workers blank release of information to get signed, send it to me when they have a question, and that way we can have that conversation without having to wait that back and forth process to get signature.
I think that's it right there, Morgan. If we could be proactive in that sense, if that could be something that maybe we can advocate on our end to getting individuals to potentially sign this, and that won't prohibit us from having the conversation beforehand and offering the judge or the judiciary the information beforehand, that maybe we can take advantage of kind of maybe not disrupting someone's housing, because that's a big thing for us, like, what does this look like? What's going to happen? What's the big picture? Because you really don't want to disadvantage someone intentionally, or because we didn't do the work proactively. So, I mean, I'm going to write your information down. I'm Angela Tillman, and I would love for our probation office to have those consents. I would love for us to have that.
I'll be looking forward to that. Yeah,
absolutely.
We have to follow HIPAA guidelines, and we can't even really acknowledge if someone's even in services with us without that release of information. So it becomes one of those, I can't confirm nor deny someone's in services with us conversation without that release of information form. So trust me, I really dislike having that conversation as well. So anything we could do to remove that barrier, I'm all for it.
I appreciate it. We know that verbiage. I can neither confirm nor deny. That lets us investigate a little further. So thank you for that, Mark.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to use this as maybe an opportunity, Eileen, for maybe you to share a little bit, because I think this conversation is emblematic of what the benefits are for communities to start to create coalitions, like the coalition in Arlington, like the coalition in Loudoun. A lot of the folks on this call are from other states and from other places that may not have a coalition like this. And so if maybe you can share a little bit about sort of how the Loudoun coalition was created, who you've brought to the table, maybe some of the folks from Arlington can talk about, because I think, you have some other players at the table that may be a little different as well, and starting to think about what a coalition could look like so that some of this communication can happen before and during somebody, whether they are a victim, a defendant, a witness, and often there's a large intersection between those populations.
Sure. So we became involved in a case in 2015, and then through a grant with the ARC of the United States, had an opportunity to put on a Pathways to Justice training, which is a big community-wide training. And in the process of doing that, the other requirement was that we created what was called a disability response team. And so we have put on 3 trainings so far. We did that first big one for the community and had a really great experience with someone from the head of community corrections at the time who said, I've been in this field for many years and have never attended a disability training before. And so he said, if I find grant funding, would you do one for community corrections for us? So we partnered with the ARC of the US, did another training. And even in the process of creating that first training, we realized that we also needed to do trainings with adults with disabilities to help empower them to be safe in the community. So Bonnie was one of the members of our team. And we started putting together day-long trainings for adults with disabilities to teach them about accessing services in the community and understanding what their rights are. So we did a second training, and then just before COVID had another grant opportunity to do another Pathways training. So we've done 3 in total. And doing those trainings was really the thing that motivated us or required us to create this group of people. And the group has changed a little bit over the years, but we have, and it's changed in really wonderful ways. So we right now have about 23 members. We have representation from the Sheriff's Department. The CIT coordinator is a member. A number of people from the Public Defender's Office, from Legal Services in Northern Virginia, the Commonwealth's Attorney, other attorneys from the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, Community Corrections, Developmental Services, mental health, emergency services, and I'm sure I'm forgetting people. We have a family advocate, a self-advocate, but it's a private attorney. It's just a really great group. And so if I get a phone call from a family or an individual who's had some kind of interaction with law enforcement or the criminal justice system, or even something that's pending, and they'll call and randomly, like they find out about us from different sources, but the group really exists to provide education to the community, but also we've become a really good resource to each other, so that I know who my kind of go-to people are to talk through a situation. So that we had an individual recently who had a situation and had never been connected as a young adult, had never been connected to any resources within the community because the family thought, we've got this, like we can manage this on our own. And then come to find out there is an array of services that it might be entitled to. And so to me, that's really important to be able to help advocate for them, and also to make sure that if they need an attorney or need an advocate, that we have a connection that we can make for them as well, to provide other resources, but really just trying to make sure that the people have what they need, and that the families understand new legislation that are possibilities for them. It's really just a matter of educating everybody, and the group is great. And so Lucy happened to then meet up with the Commonwealth's Attorney in Arlington County, and Prince William. I think the same thing will happen, that they'll work on creating a group too. So we, through Melissa Heifetz, Lucy Bienal, and I, kind of helped the Arlington group get started, and then Bonnie offered this wonderful grant opportunity. Our group changed our name to the Loudoun Disability and Justice Coalition not too long ago, because we're really not a response team in terms of immediate response, but we are a resource for the community. And we had been the only one in the Commonwealth of Virginia for a number of years. So I'm hoping that that trend picks up and that more groups get formed. If anybody would like information about how to start one, I'd be happy to share that with them.
So Eileen, if maybe you can, for everybody who's on the call, if you could maybe put your email address in the chat so that people can reach out to you. Because I think as we start to see a lot of these conversations happen, it's interconnectedness that is so critical, because there are going to be lots of different people who have lots of different pieces of information and lots of different people to work with. And I think, that is one of the strengths of both your group in Loudoun, the coalition that's formed in Arlington, is that there needs to be connectedness and communication in order for this to be an effective process. The other thing I'm going to ask you to maybe touch on a little bit to put you on the spot is one of the things that you all are doing is working specifically with the CIT program and doing training on campus with people with disabilities, helping to be a part of that training. So if maybe you can just share for folks a little bit about how that kind of came about in terms of how it started and what some of the benefits are to making some of those connections. Not every community may be as small as Loudoun is, but I think that the concept is one that is probably relatable for lots of places to think about using.
Sure. So we got started again back in 2015, 2016, involved in a case that Bonnie was involved in and Melissa Heifetz was involved in. And we formed a great relationship with the Loudoun County Sheriff's Department. So we've continued doing their CIT training. Some 911 trainings have also happened too with the call center. But we, on a regular basis, are a site visit for Loudoun CIT program. So it's a 40-hour training that individuals do. And I believe that all Sheriff's Department deputies have been through CIT. A lot of the Leesburg Police Department have been through CIT. It's expanded to fire and rescue, animal control, different county employees. We've had people come from other counties, other jurisdictions to attend the training, which is really great as well too. I know our current Commonwealth attorney also participated in the training and some of the staff from community corrections. And so we are that site visit. And we just had one this past Tuesday where our campus is unique. And I should say that, so we are one of almost 700 ARCs across the United States. All the ARCs are different. We all have the mission of serving individuals with developmental disabilities throughout their lifetime. Our campus happens to have a private day placement. So we have students with pretty significant disabilities that are here for year-round school, and they have pretty significant behavioral issues as well. We also have a preschool that is intentionally inclusive. So we have kids with disabilities, kids without disabilities being taught together. And there are 5 programs in total. But so when the Sheriff's Department comes for the training, they get a tour of the campus. They get to interact with students with disabilities, have conversations. It's mutually beneficial because the kids get to interact with law enforcement to help kind of almost proactively like de-escalate situations for them. So they're seeing people, some in uniform, some not in uniform. The time before when they were here, due to COVID, they've been coming in individual vehicles. So the kids got to go sit in a squad car and experience that, have those interactions. The attendees, the students from the classes get to see individuals with disabilities that they're probably not going to see out in the community unattended. They're not going to be the students, the kids that you see at Target or the grocery store. So they are better prepared, I think. They see, they see different things that happen. Like we can never predict what's going to happen. But then we do a PowerPoint presentation with them, and we walk them through kind of Disability 101. We talk about modifying Miranda rights, and then we've added, really expanded upon our outreach and getting individuals with disabilities, self-advocates to be speakers. And that really, I think, is like the best part of the training. And I think that's their takeaway at the end of the day too, is that's the best part of the training. So we have individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities, individuals who are dually diagnosed with mental health issues, who talk to the students that are attending the training and tell them from their perspective what would de-escalate a situation in their mind, what their behavior might look like, the things that they need help with, the situations where you might see them in the community and you might be alarmed, but if you knew them, you would be less alarmed in those circumstances. So that too serves another good dual purpose, because it's good for the individuals with disabilities to practice being self-advocates and being able to learn how to interact with law enforcement and the other attendees that are there. It's really helpful for them to be kind of known in the community. So if somebody meets them, they're not going to be as suspicious of their behavior as they might have been had they not known them. And it's a really great way of, I think, kind of sensitizing the students that attend the program to understanding people with disabilities. And it just kind of levels the playing field, I think.
So can I ask 3 questions? I'm so excited learning this. Your speaker's asking questions. So 3 things. Have you guys ever worked with CASA? You know how there's those court-appointed special advocates for children. Have you ever tried creating something like that through your group? You know?
So we haven't, but a prior person who was in charge of our advocacy center actually works for CASA now in Fairfax County, but we have not done that yet.
Okay, so that was one. I was like, guardians. Have you helped train guardians about the fact that when somebody goes into the system, they lose their, you know, it doesn't matter that they're guardians. I have a lot of guardians who get very distressed.
So we have, as part of some of our pathways to the community trainings with adults, we've added, and actually Bonnie has done this, put together kind of a questionnaire or a quiz actually for parents and guardians. And she's done some mini trainings with them. But through some grant funding that we have this year, we're going to be adding a parent training, and I'm hoping that we do an in-person version of it and then do a recorded or do a virtual version of it for those that are less comfortable, but also to reach a wider audience. But so this year we have the goal of doing like a whole training that is not just a small piece of it, but to do a larger training for families.
Good, good.
Did you have a third question?
My third one was, you know, have you ever thought about doing ride-alongs with the police? Back in the olden days, I'm going to age myself, back in the 80s, like we used to do ride-alongs with the police so they wouldn't have to be the experts to kind of help with mental health. I didn't know if there was any talk of that or.
So I think there's some initiatives that are coming with that. And due to COVID, a lot of like those kind of activities have they're kind of off the table at the moment, but hopefully in the future.